Hey everyone,
I'm Tim, and I've just finished a 9-month odyssey around Latin America. Now I'm reopening my diaries, and this time I'm bringing you along with me. Week by week, country by country, all the colors, all the craziness, all the food, all the music, and all the splendor. 9 months when each morning was a new adventure. The road was my companion, and Latin America cast its spell on me. This is my Latin America Diaries. Welcome back to Latin America Diaries, and welcome to the part of the journey where I really began to hit the wall. Because by this point in the journey, the novelty and joy of traveling around different parts of this amazing continent unfortunately had begun to evaporate. I woke up very early and took a tourist shuttle from the town of Guajua on the Ruta de las Flores in El Salvador over the border to Antigua in Guatemala. Antigua was once the capital of Guatemala, and there I checked into the Bloom Hostel, a relatively new venture that is run by a seriously cool team of locals. Surrounded by towering volcanoes, Antigua is one of the most spectacular towns in Central America. So what is there to do there? Well, of course, you guessed it. It was time for another wander through cobblestone streets, colorful colonial buildings, artisan markets, magnificent churches, and even what many people claim to be one of the most beautiful McDonald's in the world, housed inside a restored colonial building. Antigua was largely destroyed by the 1773 Santa Marta earthquake, after which the Spanish colonial authorities moved the capital around 45 kilometers away to what is now Guatemala City. Rather than being rebuilt into a modern city, Antigua was largely preserved, leaving it feeling almost frozen in time. Today, it's a UNESCO World Heritage City with colorful facades, ruined churches, elegant plazas, and spectacular views towards the surrounding volcanoes. Now, don't get me wrong, it really is that beautiful, but at that point, at the end, or almost at the end, of a 9-month journey around Latin America, I had seen my fair share of beautiful plazas and crumbling old cathedrals. So as it was, I didn't end up spending that much time in Antigua. I walked around the local markets and also stopped in at a small food market happening in a square near a cathedral, where I sampled some Guatemalan food and admired some very creative methods of keeping roadside barbecues running. I also picked up a slice of flan antigueño, a traditional Guatemalan custard cake with a rich, creamy texture, somewhere between a flan and a sponge cake. With that in hand, I headed up to the rooftop terrace of Bloom Hostel to celebrate the Guatemalan edition of my 40th birthday. From the rooftop there was one thing that I kept watching, and that was the conical top of the Volcán de Fuego. It's one of the most active volcanoes in the world. It's famous for its frequent eruptions, and on a clear day you can sometimes see ash, clouds, or even glowing lava from Antigua itself. Many visitors come to Antigua for one reason alone: to hike to the viewpoint overlooking Volcán de Fuego. It's a strenuous 2-day hike that requires overnighting in some hikers' huts up on the side of Volcán de Fuego, and I was seriously considering doing it, but to be honest, I'd kind of lost interest by this point. I got chatting with Rodrigo, the owner and manager of Bloom Hostel, and in that conversation I kind of got to the point of deciding that I wouldn't hike it. And besides, the cough that I had sort of been battling when I was in Cuenca in Ecuador about 2 months earlier, and it had sort of made its return in Nicaragua a few weeks ago, by this point it was starting to bother me again. Instead, I sat up on the rooftop of the Bloom Hostel, doing a bit of work online, sipping coffee and other cool drinks, and just sort of waiting for the volcano to put on a show, which ultimately it didn't. However, I certainly have been putting on a show here for the past 9 months, so if you are enjoying this, please consider giving this video a like, subscribe to my channel, and share it on your social media. And if you really enjoy what you're seeing, then please tell your family and friends about it. It really helps me grow this YouTube channel and builds a bit of a community around what I'm doing here. At the end of my trip, I had a couple of places that I still wanted to tick off, such as a couple of cities, including a place with some ruins in Guatemala, and 2 more countries before making my way back to Cancun in Mexico to take my flight out of Latin America. My next destination was Quetzaltenango, usually just called Xela by the locals. It's Guatemala's 2nd largest city, and it's often regarded as the country's cultural capital. Quetzaltenango sits high up in the mountains in Guatemala, and it's a real center for Mayan culture culture because the Mayan Empire once spread right out across this region. And if that sounds familiar, then that's because, in fact, in Quetzaltenango, I was not far from San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas, in Mexico, that I had visited months earlier. I've made a video about that too, and if you're interested in watching that, I have linked that in the video description below. To get to Quetzaltenango from Antigua, I decided to eschew a tourist shuttle and instead jump on the local buses for a bit of an adventure and also to save a bit of money. To do that, I needed to catch a bus from Antigua to the highway junction at Chimaltenango. From there, I simply walked around the corner to the Pan American Highway and waited by the roadside for the next bus heading west. The journey wound for about 3 hours through Guatemala's spectacular highlands, climbing higher and higher into the mist-covered volcanic mountains before finally arriving in Quetzaltenango, where I checked into the Hotel Ideal. Now, I feel like making a joke about the hotel's name here is probably a bit below the belt. It wasn't a bad hotel, but I wouldn't say that ideal is the word that I would use for it. Nonetheless, it was comfortable. The owner was friendly. I had a private room for the price of a dorm room in another hostel, and they had hot water. So in the end, it was fine. The next morning, though, my health took a turn for the worse. I woke up with chest pain and a severe cough, and I knew that the cough and whatever had been going on in my chest since Cuenca in Ecuador months earlier had finally caught up with me. I got myself to a small hospital in Quetzaltenango where the doctor examined me while his 4 trainee nurses, for very young Guatemalan girls, basically just watched on and giggled. After listening to my story about how I'd sort of been battling this on and off for a couple of weeks, and also how I'd been on and off buses, crossing borders, having irregular sleep patterns, maybe not eating that well, he decided and told me that I was probably on the verge of contracting pneumonia and that I would need some pretty strong medication to make sure that I didn't get any sicker. He then proceeded to write the world's longest prescription. There were antibiotics, there was a cough suppressant, there was something to break up the mucus, there were antihistamines, there was pain relief, there were all these things in there. There were vitamins and probiotics to make sure that the cocktail of medicines he was prescribing me didn't completely decimate my immune system. I looked at him and was sort of like, do I really need to take all of this medicine? And he looked me square in the eye and was like, do you want to find out what the inside of a Guatemalan hospital looks like? Because if you don't take this medicine, then you will find that out. Message received. I jumped in an Uber and headed across town to a very well-stocked pharmacy that the doctor had recommended. He had told me to go there because some of the medicines couldn't be found in any regular pharmacy because they were imported. I handed over the prescription and was given a bill of $170. I knew that it was going to be expensive, but I didn't realize it would be that expensive. But again, this is something that the doctor had warned me about because of the nature of the medicines that I'd been prescribed. I, again, wondered whether it was really worth it. But again, not keen to see the inside of a Guatemalan hospital, so I paid the money and sent off the bill to travel insurance. Moral to the story, never travel without travel insurance. I got the medicine, headed back to my hotel, and then started taking it almost immediately. And over the next few days began to recover and started exploring Quetzaltenango at a much slower pace. It's a beautiful city, almost permanently wrapped in cool mountain mist. It has a dreamy atmosphere that's completely different from what most people imagine when they think of Central America. If you dropped me there without telling me where I was, I probably would have guessed maybe the Peruvian Andes rather than Central America just south of Mexico. The city itself is a fascinating blend of cultures. Indigenous Mayan traditions remain incredibly strong, while many of the grand civic buildings reflect the influence of European, particularly German architecture from the city's wealthy coffee boom years around the turn of the 20th century. The result is something completely unexpected, a misty mountain city where German-inspired architecture, indigenous Mayan culture, and Central American life somehow come together. It's quietly and subtly beautiful. While I was in Quetzaltenango, I made a visit to the Mayan Cultural Museum, where I was given special permission to film the incredible textiles, artifacts, and traditions of the Maya people for this video. It was fascinating to learn how this culture has endured for centuries. The museum's exhibits explored the history of the Maya civilization, their manuscripts and traditions, and the extraordinary craftsmanship that still survives today. I learned about how different woven patterns identify different communities and family lineages, how clothing changes between the warmer and colder seasons, and just how much painstaking work goes into producing a single traditional garment. What made this experience especially meaningful was that my guide wasn't simply explaining history, she was living it. She herself was of Maya heritage, dressed in the traditional clothing of her community, and spoke about her culture with such warmth and pride. The museum kind of reignited my passion for traveling on this journey a little bit, because Antigua, while beautiful, it had kind of fallen a bit flat. Not anything to do with Antigua the town. That's amazing. I was just tired. And then I got stuck in Quetzaltenango and had to visit the doctor and so on. But when I visited that museum, it really kind of re-infused me with like the enthusiasm to keep traveling and keep exploring, and that was really what I needed at that moment. After the visit to the museum, I found the perfect charm for my bracelet in a local marketplace. It's a colorful woven piece made from traditional Guatemalan fabric. Originally, it had been designed as an earring, but it perfectly captured what I wanted to remember about Guatemala, not just its volcanoes and colonial towns, but the living Maya culture that had unexpectedly reignited my enthusiasm for traveling. Unfortunately, high altitude, cold and misty Quetzaltenango was not the ideal location to be recovering from a chest infection. And there was also one more place in Guatemala that I wanted to tick off my list, so eventually it was time to keep moving. I boarded another local bus bound for Lago Atitlán and the lakeside village of San Juan La Laguna. The journey took about 3 hours, and although as the crow flies Quetzaltenango and Lago Atitlán are not that far away from each other, the road there took me winding through mountain passes and straight down an escarpment, descending from the cool highlands towards one of the most beautiful lakes in Central America. By mid-afternoon, I had rolled into San Juan La Laguna and checked into the Mundo Abu resort, ready for the next chapter of the adventure. This was one of the cutest places that I stayed at while I was in Latin America. The owner had decided to set up a hostel, which wasn't just a hostel, but more like a mini theme park in a way, but a theme park where all of the attractions were based around activities on the lake. Mundo Abu literally translates to Abu's world, and Abu is the toddler who is the son of the owner who set this hostel up, and he spent the days basically running around the property keeping everyone entertained. I decided not to film him out of respect for the family's privacy. However, I can say that the family were so kind, and this whole place, this whole hostel resort kind of thing, had been designed almost like out of the imagination of a little kid. In fact, resort and theme park doesn't quite capture it. It's like a combination of, there's like a hostel room, but then there's also cabins. There's one room which is completely made of glass so that you can lie in bed and from your cabin, glass cabin, watch the sunrise over the lake. There are kayaks available for rent, catamarans and so on. It's like there are all these little surprises. You can just enjoy Lago Atitlán without having to leave your accommodation. Better still, it was warmer here, so it was a great place to recover from my chest infection. And I was indeed starting to feel better. From Mundo Abu, it was a short walk uphill into the center of the town San Juan La Laguna. Nowadays, it's become one of the liveliest towns around Lago Atitlán, attracting backpackers and young Guatemalans who come here to drink, party, and enjoy the lakeside atmosphere. But despite that reputation, it never felt overwhelming. The streets were alive with music, colorful murals covered almost every wall, cafes spilled out into the footpaths, and the surrounding green hills framed everything beautifully. And then, of course, there's the lake. Lago Atitlán is one of Guatemala's great natural wonders. Formed thousands of years ago inside the collapsed crater of an enormous volcano, today it's surrounded by several towering volcanoes that often disappear behind drifting cloud. The scenery is spectacular. One of my favorite moments there came at sunrise. I wandered down to the lake's edge from my room in Mundo Abu and simply stood there watching the first light slowly creep across the lake. As the sun climbed above the mountains, the clouds swirled and the volcanoes slowly emerged. It was wonderfully peaceful. On another morning, while the weather was still calm, I borrowed one of Mundo Abu's kayaks and paddled out onto the lake. Being out on the water gives you a completely different perspective. The volcanoes seem larger and the villages looked tiny in comparison. Everything was wonderfully still.
Anywhere, anyway, baby, just name the time. When I'ma come through, girl, you got me cruising on the moonlight. Top down, playing new sounds while the wind blows over it. checking my maps, heading a stack.
There are plenty of activities on the lake, from kayaking to boat trips between the villages. Swimming is possible there too, however some people had advised me not to put my head under the water because some of the communities around the lake don't treat their sewage before it flows into the lake. It's not a dirty lake, like certainly you don't see it when you're there, but at the same time I had been told that people who had inadvertently swallowed a bit of lake water had ended up quite sick. I'd paddle around on the lake, wander into town for a coffee, watch the volcanoes drift in and out of the clouds, and then head back to Mundo Abu to do, well, not much at all. After a few days, I took a public boat from San Juan La Laguna across the lake towards Panajachel, the main gateway town on the lake. Panajachel is much busier and considerably more tourist-oriented, but that suited me perfectly. I checked into a lively backpacker hostel with a swimming pool in the middle, found a chair beside the water, and simply soaked up the sunshine. I'd wander slowly around town, admire the views back across the lake towards the volcanoes, grab something to eat, and otherwise continue doing very little. And after everything that had happened in the past few days, sitting by Lake Atitlán and just chilling out and soaking up the sun and the warmth of the atmosphere was exactly what the doctor ordered. That and the very long prescription list. While I was there, I heard that the Volcán de Fuego, which was the volcano visible from Antigua, had started building up its activity again, so I decided that it was time to get back to Antigua to try my luck one more time. I jumped in a tourist shuttle, headed back to Antigua, checked into the Bloom hostel one more time and sat up on the rooftop, but again, to no avail. So the next morning I decided that it was finally time to leave this part of Guatemala behind. I packed up my belongings and got to the bus station in Antigua where a local cultural festival was going on, jumped on a bus and headed the short distance up towards Guatemala City, the nation's capital. This would be the last time in my journey that I would travel along the Pan American Highway, the road that in March I had stood at the southernmost end of in Argentina, the road upon which I had traversed the Nazca lines in Peru, which I had followed along the narrow isthmus of Central America. From Guatemala City, I would strike out on smaller highways where the Pan American Highway would continue northwards through Mexico, through the US and Canada towards Alaska. Guatemala City is one of the largest capital cities in Central America, but like a lot of the other capital cities, it's not particularly a destination for tourists in and of itself. For me, it was simply a place to change buses before continuing my journey. That night, I checked into the Tequila Sunrise Hostel and got an early night, because the next morning I would be setting off to another country, one of the most fascinating destinations that I went to in Central America. To find out where that is, please make sure that you like, share and subscribe, and tune in again next time on Latin America Diaries.